Good evening. You're watching NDTV. The Israeli military has called on all civilians in Gaza City to evacuate southward as it maintains its bombardment in response to the attacks by Hamas terrorists last weekend. How is the war going to change the world? How long and painful is it going to be? And what are the likely objectives of Israel? Joining us now is Dr. Eyal Hulata, who is a former head of Israel's National Security Council. Dr. Hulata, we understand it must have been very difficult for you to watch all of this away from home, but thank you very much for speaking to NDTV.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think it's very important to have people around the world understand the situation in Israel as it is. And again, as you say, I'm away from home. Very difficult times for all Israelis, I think for all the Jewish people, and for me being away from home,
right.
Not any different.
Right. Dr. Hulata, in one of your interviews recently, you had predicted that the offensive by Israel will be hard and intense. And that is what is happening now. How do you see this retaliation by Israel on Gaza, particularly this buildup of troops, localized raids, call for evacuation, and also a likely ground incursion?
So I think it's important to understand the situation right away. And if you may, the word retaliation, I don't think it clearly depicts the situation as it is. Last Saturday, just 8 days ago, Hamas conducted the worst terror attack in the history of Israel. In fact, this was the amount of casualties, the amount of people slaughtered in their homes, in their beds, and snatched. This does not resemble anything else that Israel has experienced or Jewish people has experienced maybe since the Holocaust. This is a really very bad day. Hamas is a terror organization. They conducted this and they did this deliberately. The aim of the Israeli government is not to retaliate. The aim of the Israeli government is to remove Hamas from leadership in Gaza so that these things cannot happen again. And I would say, and that the Gazans have a government that thinks of them and their well-being rather than thinking on how to kill Israelis at the most astonishing amount that they could, as they did just 8 days ago. This was a rampage. There is no other way to describe it.
Right. Dr. Hulata, the hostage situation specifically looks particularly concerning. So there are elderly people, there are also infants. But given that Hamas has this knowledge of Gaza, it can move the hostages through rubble and tunnels and bunkers. I understand that you've handled and been part of such negotiations in the past. So tell us, what are the challenges and options for the Israeli army there?
Yeah, I seen the banner just below as I speak that they say that Hamas declares that 9 more hostages killed in Israeli airstrikes. We need to understand what Hamas has been doing. Hamas snatched about 150 civilians, most of them civilians, not all of them, some of them are soldiers, kids, children, babies, grandmothers, grandfathers in wheelchairs. You've seen the photos. I mean, this was awful footage. And they brought them back into Gaza to put them as human shields when we attack. I mean, the Israeli army, we do not go unintentionally on civilians. We don't do this. We've never done this and we're not doing this now. We give advance warning before we attack so people know where it's going to be. When 9 Israelis hostages are killed by Hamas, what does that mean? It means Hamas put them where they know that we're attacking deliberately so that they can put this message out and to try to demoralize the people in Israel. This is very sickening and this is really heartbreaking. I was in touch was one of the survivors of the communities around Gaza recently. He survived because he went to fight in Hamas, leaving his wife and his 3 children, young children, at home. When he came back after the shooting, they weren't there. Never to be found since. We all know where they are. He just hopes that they are alive. He doesn't know that they are alive. He hopes that they are alive. This is what Hamas is doing. Now, you're right. This complicates the situation very much because the Israeli government needs to weigh their options. What's first? Going after Hamas so this doesn't happen again, or trying to appease them so that they can bring us the hostages. This is inconceivable. Right. The demand must be very, very clear. Hamas needs to release all of the hostages immediately. This is a demand that should come not only from Israel, this is a demand that should come from the entire international community. Right. We all should stand up and tell Hamas, this is inhumane, you don't do this, this is unjustified, release them immediately, or at least though they're still alive, because as you can see, Hamas is doing whatever they can to make sure that they're fewer every day.
Right. So that's a very important point that you make, Dr. Hulata. But given the changing dimensions of this war, a military victory may not be enough for you. And like you were also talking about international community, the country might also need diplomatic and political successes. So in that context, this likely siege of Gaza and blocking of food and medical access, there is a sense that it might complicate Israel's position too. What are your thoughts on that, sir?
So first, I think that Israel's international situation is very clear and very warm. I mean, I think we got a lot of not only empathy but sympathy from the international community, including India. Prime Minister Modi was very clear in his messages, and Israel is thankful for that. When I was National Security Advisor, I had close ties with my Indian counterpart, and I know how deeply the Indian people feel for the need of Israel to be strong and to defend itself. I think this is also the time for the international community to understand that Israel cannot deal with all of this alone. Hamas cannot both kill us and then come to expect from us to be those who give the humanitarian aid to his population, where who put them there in the first place. If it was up to Israel, this wouldn't have happened. Right. And the fact that we were taken by surprise should explain to what extent Israel did not plan any of this. We were doing other things, we were busy in other things. Hamas brought this upon his people. Israel has called for the people of Gaza to evacuate their homes because Hamas is fighting from within their homes and from under their homes with tunnels. And we don't want to hurt them. We do not. This is not how we act. Now, this footage doesn't look good, right? Because a lot of Gazans need to flee from their homes. We don't want to kill them.
Right.
But we have to get rid of Hamas. And I think that the international community can play a very significant role right now in making sure that everybody understands the situation and that Hamas understands that they must stop.
Right.
Because if they would only release the hostages and stop shooting at us, right? What will we do? We will stop firing, right? We did not bring this war. Right. They need to relinquish power. And the fact that Hamas won't do this, even though they were asked to do this by many countries, not only the Americans and the Western countries who stand by us. I know what's the deep sentiment also in the Arab world, right, in the moderate Arab world, that right, reached the arm to Israel. Egypt made peace with us more than 40 years ago. And the Abraham Accords countries in the Gulf, we're in the middle of negotiating a normalization pact with Saudi Arabia. This was on the outset of this war. Hamas did not only attack us, it ruined a process in the Middle East, and it's done so deliberately because this is their ideology, and this is the Iranian ideology that provided their means and funding and training and potentially also direct orders to do this at this time. This is all what's going around. And what I'm saying is that the humanitarian situation in Gaza, we feel for it. We feel for the Gazan people. I said this before, the Gazans need better leadership than Hamas.
Right.
If they could, I'm sure they would overthrow Hamas. Most of them do not support Hamas, of course.
Right.
But they cannot do this because they are under a very strong and stiff control of Hamas leadership that is brutal also to its own people. But, Israel cannot deal with this at the moment. Israel is at war. We need to take Hamas out so this does not happen again. Right. And it is important that this situation is understood and the humanitarian situation in Gaza can be helped and addressed by countries, maybe such as India as well. You can reach out as well and provide what they need so they can survive this issue. But what's most important is to understand Israel does not target them.
Right.
The Gazans are not the enemy of Israel. Right. Hamas is the enemy of Israel.
Right. Dr. Hulata, in one of your recent interviews, you made a significant point that Hamas, with its recent attack, made a strategic, maybe calculated decision to play out of the playbook, use all the tools it has and also inflict the most damage on Israel. There is an understanding that till 2021, there was a strong counter to every attack that Hamas made on Israel. What changed after that with Hamas and also with Israel's own understanding of Hamas?
Well, that is a very good question that you put up, because I think this is at the core of what happened to us. Israel failed to recognize that Hamas has made a strategic shift from trying to manage the Gaza community or population and try to be reasonable. And I think Israel played that role. We were hoping that this will happen. The government that I served as National Security Advisor allowed workers to come from Gaza into Israel to work. Somewhere along this time, in recent months, perhaps, I don't know exactly, if we know, we'd have an advance warning of this fight coming, of this war coming upon us. Somewhere along this line, Hamas made a strategic decision to play out of the playbook, not to seek for the well-being of the Gazans, but to seek to murder Israelis. I don't know exactly when this happened. Of course, this is in the charter of Hamas, right? They were built or they're erected in 1987 for the sole purpose of killing us. But I think that we had a belief or an understanding that Hamas also cares about the people that they govern since 2005 when we evacuated Gaza and left to the last inch, to the last soldier, to the last grave that we took from the ground back to Israel. Hamas consciously made a different decision. I have to say that I don't understand the logic, but you can never understand logic of terrorist organizations.
Yes.
They played out of the playbook, and this will be the consequence. They have to be removed from power in Gaza.
Right. So also help us understand, Dr. Hulata, how much control does Hamas actually have on Gaza? Because as far as we understand, there are also other players. So does that strengthen Israel's strategy or weaken it?
Yeah, so Hamas has full control of Gaza, of course. You're right that there are other militant or terrorist organizations in Gaza. The most strongest of them or most vicious of them until last Saturday was Palestinian Islamic Jihad. When I was National Security Advisor, we had a round of conflict with Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We managed to finish this in 4 days. We were very we're critical, very surgical in what we did to make sure that we hurt as few civilians as possible and as little collateral damage. Hamas did not join, so we had the opportunity to finish this in 4 days. This is one of the signals that I said before that Israel thought that Hamas was going for some kind of arrangement. This happened again for this government, by the way, a few months ago, in the very same circumstances with Islamic Jihad. But all of this is part of the past. When Hamas decides to be the most violent actor and such a brutal attack on Israelis, all the factions are standing behind them. When we target Hamas now, we also target Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and every terrorist in Gaza that will try to attack us is a target, and this is how we're gonna perform. We cannot differentiate between them. Hamas relinquished its capability of distinguishing itself from those extremists, and decided to be even more extreme than them.
Right. Dr. Hulata, there have also been frequent comparisons of Hamas with ISIS, especially since last weekend. How accurate is that comparison, especially in proportion and magnitude?
Yeah, so the comparison of Hamas to ISIS, people need to have something that they know in their memory to understand what they are seeing. Very difficult to do, right? Because nothing like this has ever happened. The closest in the footage, in the brutality, in the anger and violence and inhumane behavior of those terrorists who invaded our communities and homes and killed children, babies in their sleep, torched them to death, is the things we've seen from ISIS. I'm talking to an Indian audience. You've had your rounds of terrorism before. You know how devastating this could be. This does not resemble anything that you've seen before. We need to understand the numbers. We're talking about 1,000 people killed in a single day. Israel is a country of 10 million citizens. 10 million. 1,000 out of them. Can you do the multiplication for the Indian context? You're over 1 billion people in India. This will be like taking out 100,000 people in a single day. These are the magnitude. So people need to have some kind of memory to understand what is around them. Right. ISIS is the only thing that we know that has been able to do, at least in the Middle East, such brutal things to other people. And unfortunately, we're now in that list. I think that when President Biden spoke up to the entire world and made that comparison, he spoke from the bottom of the heart. Yes. I think that at least for the Americans, this also looks like 9/11 by the magnitude and the hurt inside of the nation, in the heart of the nation, that a terrorist group reaches out and takes so many lives in a single day. Those are the things that this resembles. Unfortunately, we didn't want to be in this list, but we are, and Israel is a strong country, and we will prevail.
Right. So talking about the big picture, Dr. Hulata, there have also been new warnings from Hezbollah and Iran, and they're saying that the fighting could escalate into a regional conflict. Many have said that the joining of Hezbollah could be a game-changer moment for this war. How central is the role of Hezbollah in this potential escalation of this war?
Right. So it has been 8 days, and Hezbollah is doing, I think, whatever they can to drag us in. I think they think that there is a kind of narrative of who fired first, and this kind of mindset that is completely irrelevant to the situation. Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran. It's a creation of Iran from start to bottom. And if Hezbollah joins this war, it's because Iran has decided to put another piece in this board into the game after they've done it with Hamas. I hope for Lebanon that Hezbollah doesn't do this. Because if Hezbollah does that, Israel will need to go after them as well. Hezbollah is a bigger organization. They have many more rockets. That's true. They try to frighten the Israeli public. What will happen when they come in? We have enough military to address both Hamas and Hezbollah. They know this. They should know this. And if they do this, we'll need to go after them. They also operate from within civilian infrastructure.
Right.
And in 2006, in the Second Lebanese War, Israel was forced to devastate Lebanon as well, because we needed them to stop shooting at our people. I hope this doesn't happen again. I hope they make a more reasonable calculus, but they're also a terrorist organization. And if they think that they can use this opportunity to also attack us from the north, the consequences will be as there. And once they do this, people ask themselves, is Iran behind this? Is it not behind this? Of course Iran is behind this. Once Hezbollah joins the war, everybody knows. Right. That Iran is behind this. This is the only way this could have happened. And again, the international community should pay attention to that. Iran is not only Israel's problem. Iran is a regional problem. Iran is a global problem. Iran is the sole source of most of the terrorism, the extreme Islamic terrorism we see around the world. India knows that as well, unfortunately, from time to time. I hope they don't do this, but if they do, we'll fight them as well.
Right. But Dr. Hulata, you're saying that Israel has the military capabilities to counter a multi-frontal attack and also counter organizations like Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations if this war escalates.
So again, I don't want to get into the operational tactical details of that. Of course, we do not want this. Israel, I think, has done whatever it can to evade war. Me personally, the various roles they took, especially as National Security Advisor, Israel does not look for another war in the Middle East. Israel had enough wars in the Middle East. Israel is seeking normalization with our neighbors. As I said before, we were indeed in the midst of a normalization process with Saudi Arabia. Just think where we could have been if we had a normalization with Saudi Arabia instead of what we're having now. Right. Clearly, they wanted to derail with this process. Right. Those who did this in Iran, in Hamas, elsewhere, they wanted to derail this process. They're not after integrating Israel in the region. They want our annihilation. They want it out of the Middle East. And there are a minority who want this. Most of the Arab countries around us do not want this. And this is why they're joining in peace agreements with us. And I hope that they will continue to do this. I'm certain that they will continue to do this once this is over. So, I think that getting into the details, how exactly we'll do this and how can we fight both fronts, I assure you, the IDF may have been surprised, and it was, and this is devastating. And many friends have lost their lives during this. But we have regrouped. Right. We're up. We're standing and we're fighting.
Right. Dr. Hulata, I know you've touched upon this, but Israel has been getting a lot of support from the US. President Joe Biden has vowed in strongest words possible to support you in every way. How do you see this? We also saw the meeting of Anthony Blinken with both Israeli and Palestinian leaders. Does this also mean that the US can influence the military action by Israel, particularly with regard to ground incursions, which can worsen humanitarian crisis?
So I think that first, Israel cannot thank enough the way the United States of America is standing by us. President Biden, of course, is leading the effort, but as you say, Secretary Blinken was in Israel and Secretary Austin was in Israel. When both Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense come to Israel to show support and to say clearly to all of the adversaries, we stand with Israel. By the way, Blinken said something that was very important. He said Israel can defend itself.
Right.
We will make sure that Israel can defend itself. And that's the kind of partnership, strategic partnership that Israel has with the United States. And we're thankful for it. As for influence, from what I'm getting from my friends back home, the Americans are not trying to influence what we're doing. We're getting full support to what we're doing. They understand, I think, as well, that Hamas cannot continue to rule Gaza. That's a joint objective. And I expect this to continue. We're getting a lot of support from them. This is very, very important at this difficult times. And not only from the Americans. We're getting support from European countries. We're getting support from your country. And we're thankful for that as well. But this is a fight Israel needs to fight, and Israel needs to win.
Right. So talking about my own country, something that you just mentioned, India has had a long-standing engagement with the Palestinian issue. But under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India's relations with Israel have become very strong. How do you see this support from India to Israel? The Prime Minister yesterday also called for all countries to fight terror on all matters. In fact, he said that terrorism under any context, any reference is bad, and every country is responsible for fighting against terror. How do you see this kind of support from India?
I think the support we're getting from India is immense. I participated in the meeting with Prime Minister Modi about 2 years ago with Prime Minister Bennett, and we could feel, in his presence, in his physical presence, we could feel the real friendship and support that deeply in his heart he understands for the people of Israel. You're showing now pictures of Prime Minister Modi meeting Netanyahu in his last visit in Israel several years ago. I think that what is important from the entire international community and also from India is to make sure that the international community understands that when you say that Israel has a right to defend itself, it means that we have a right to fight. I've been talking to other media outlets, and I see all of them. People keep challenging us. Why do you do this? How can you retaliate on the Gazans? We're not retaliating on the Gazans. We need to fight this war. War is ugly. We didn't ask for it. And I think that while we're getting this support from India, it means a lot, because India is a very important country in the world. You're the most populated country in the world right now. We know this. And a very rising economy and power, not only in Asia, but globally. Having India understand that, having India understand that we have a right to fight, that we had a right to defend ourselves, so this doesn't happen again, is really important to us.
Right.
And I'm sure that your country and your leadership will do whatever they can to influence other countries to give us that support.
Right. Dr. Hulata, talking about Israel's own domestic politics, an emergency government has been formed, but there are questions being asked of the military intel and operations failure. What are the lessons for the country here about its own systems and leadership?
Yeah. So, in terms of lessons, of course, I will try to be brief, because I think that we need to devote our attention now to how we win this war. Of course, there are many open questions that we have to ask. This shouldn't have happened to us. I will not shy away from that. Our intelligence community, I worked for our intelligence community of Israel for more than 2 decades. I know our capabilities. We're better than this. This shouldn't have happened to us. We should have been more alert. Our defenses should have been better. The civilians in the communities of Israel, they need the military to protect them. And as Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi said a few days ago to all of the Israeli public, the military has indeed failed the communities, because the security establishment, and then I say we, because I feel part of it, this never leaves us. We failed our communities. We failed our citizens when we weren't there to protect them. This also cannot happen. Again, there are many lessons to be drawn. As you ask about the unity government, I have to say I'm very happy this happened. I think that the government of Israel was busy with various things and not focused enough on the needs of the people. I'm very happy that the best of the military experience of Israel is now sitting together, holding the wheel, to make sure that we make the right decisions and to make sure that we play this the way we should. This is a very difficult time for us. Israel will stand united, as you know, and I'm sure this has been covered in your media. I've seen some of those. Israel has had quite a difficult year with protests on the streets against the government and their policies and many things. And there were questions whether or not Israel is still united. Are we still the Israel that everybody used to know? Well, unfortunately, in times of crisis, we can demonstrate not only to the world but to ourselves who we really are. Right. What Israel is really about. Right. Israel is one big family, and we stand together and we fight together.
Right. I just want to come back to that question on normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And we know the talks were on and there were sincere efforts being made. And that is when Hamas attacked. And something similar, I understand, happened during the Oslo Accords too, when there were peace efforts. So the timing clearly is suspect. But do you think such talks of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, do you think those efforts have a chance of being derailed and stalled now?
So I think once the leadership in Saudi Arabia, and specifically the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, made a strategic decision to normalize its relationship with Israel, then that ship has sailed. This will happen. And those who think they can derail it by terror, they will be mistaken. Because once it's a strategic interest of Israel and a strategic interest of Saudi Arabia, and of course a strategic interest of the United States of America that is brokering this negotiation and managing it. Once all of those parties understand that this is what they need for their prosperity and for the prosperity of the region, it will happen.
Right.
And the bad guys can't take this away from us. They can derail it, they can delay it, and unfortunately I believe that they were successful. I hope I'm wrong and that we will be able to do this again. But you touched upon another issue, and that is the core nature of Hamas. Because this is true. You mentioned it, and it is true. When Israel started the negotiation towards a two-state solution in the Oslo years, when Prime Minister Rabin was Prime Minister, it was Hamas who decided to derail this process. They bombed buses in the middle of Jerusalem, the middle of Tel Aviv. You know, this was almost 30 years ago, but I remember this vividly. I have friends and family who were involved during that time as well. There will all be those people who try to derail this. By the way, that round of terrorists, of course, put a political backlash in Israel against the two-state solution, because people said, how can we reason with these people? How can we make a peace agreement with them when they bomb our kids in the streets? This ended up with the assassination of a Prime Minister Rabin. Right. Many things have changed during that. This is what Hamas does, and unfortunately, they've done it again. Right. I have to say, I was hoping there were more reason in Palestinian leadership. I was hoping there was more reason in their understanding that it's about time, after decades of conflict, to start taking care of their own people. Right. I was wrong, unfortunately. Right. And we need to make sure they have new leadership.
Right. Dr. Hulata, my last question to you. You've made such critical points, and I'll wrap up with this. Do you see this war polarizing the world further, creating more divisions geopolitically?
So I'm not sure I understood if you asked about Israel or about the entire world in polarization. Can you repeat that, please?
So I'm asking you, how do you see this war? What kind of impact do you see this having on geopolitics? Do you see this war polarizing the world further, creating more divisions geopolitically, especially if the international community is if they're not on the same page, at a time like this?
Right. So I think on Israel, whoever thought that this will break us, he's up for a surprise, because this will not break us. This will unite us. I think this already happened. Would you imagine 10 days ago that Prime Minister Netanyahu would build a unity government? Nobody in Israel thought he would do this. But in times of crisis, we do. You see the amount of volunteer in the people of Israel together. I have stories. I'm in Washington, but I get all of those stories from my friends, and you see people, religious and non-religious, even Arab Israelis, volunteer to help, because they understand that this is something that is unheard of. This is actually bringing us together. Of course, more things will happen. When this ends, there will be an inquiry committee. People will start asking very hard questions about what happened, and they will demand serious answers from the government, from the military. We have some difficult times ahead of us, like we had in previous devastating issues such as this. But I'm confident, I'm hopeful, but I'm also confident that this will bring us all back together as Israelis. This can be a new beginning for us, understanding what's important and what's not. What are we fighting for? Right. How difficult it is for our ancestors to build this homeland for the Jewish people as we rose from ashes of the Second World War. We cannot let this go. Right. We have nowhere else to go. This is our home. We need to fight for it together. So to your question, I think that you will see us, after you've seen us in our worst, you're going to see us in our best.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Hulata, for speaking to NDTV and sharing your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much.